Hey everybody, Jace Allen here. This episode comes with a disclaimer. The topic of Chinese-made guitars is a very triggering issue for many people. I hesitated to even make this video, but I wanted to know the facts for my own benefit, as well as help dispel some myths for those that enjoy buying Chinese or other overseas-made guitars. This video is just a snapshot of the whole picture. It isn't meant to be the last word on the subject. Also, please keep the conversation in the comments civil. Thank you. Chinese-made guitars are garbage. Hey everybody, Jace Allen here. We've all heard those stereotypical comments about Chinese-made guitars. That they're junk, that they're firewood, they use child labor, they use slave labor, the money goes to the Communist Party, and on and on and on. But what's the truth? Are Chinese guitars a bad buy? Are we simply contributing to the decline of American manufacturing when we buy Chinese guitars? Are Chinese guitars part of some huge human rights violations? We'll explore these issues and more on this episode, so stay tuned. So what's the deal with Chinese guitars? Why did guitar manufacturing shift away from the US in the first place? Well, you can kind of blame the Japanese for that. In the mid-1960s, Japanese companies like Matsumoku and Fuji Gaki began building guitars. By the 1970s, they began making copies of American guitars like the Gibson Les Paul. This was fueled by Americans wanting cheaper alternatives to the iconic guitars that they watched their favorite rock stars play for the past 20 years. However, the economic landscape in the US was changing. The early 70s saw a recession that lasted a few years. The early 70s also saw the end of a trade embargo against China and improved US-China relations. This resulted in manufacturing shifting overseas to take advantage of cheaper labor. All this meant that personal income was affected. Median income in the US faced drops in both the early 70s and 80s. Japanese manufacturers saw this as an opportunity and began producing well-made copies of American guitars. This led to what became known as the lawsuit era. In the late 70s, Gibson filed a lawsuit against Ibanez of Japan over their Les Paul designs. They settled the case out of court, and this prevented Ibanez from copying Gibson's open book headstock design. But the Japanese guitars kept coming. Fender, rather than suing Japanese companies, shifted production of their guitars to Japan. Eventually, Gibson did the same with their Epiphone brand. The 90s brought more and more imported goods from China, and that included guitars. The Cort Guitar Company began manufacturing guitars in China in the early 90s. By the early 2000s, Gibson opened a guitar plant in China as well. The mid to late 90s also saw the rise of the internet, and companies like eBay and Amazon began selling products online. This meant that Chinese companies could sell directly to consumers. As the decades rolled on and CNC manufacturing technology evolved, guitars coming out of China began to rival American-made models in terms of quality and affordability. The early 2020s saw the rise of the budget guitar, and China was at its heart. China's rise to guitar manufacturing dominance began in Chang'an in the Guizhou province. Chang'an is the world's largest guitar producer and produces over 2.25 million guitars each year. Chang'an's guitar industry began in 2012 after the state council encouraged the province to develop its industries. Chang'an has a guitar cultural industrial park with a complete industrial chain, and its products are exported to over 40 countries. We've all heard the tropes about Chinese-made guitars, that they're junk, cheap, they have bad quality control, etc. As with any mass-produced item, there can be quality issues here and there, and China has many manufacturers from large to small, so you can't really lump all Chinese-made guitars into one single category. Look at the Eastman guitar brand, for example. These are very high-end instruments with prices to match. The quality of Eastman guitars is equal to any guitar made by Taylor or Martin. China also benefits from automation. They have embraced CNC manufacturing, which limits quality issues. Chinese manufacturers have mastered the craft of guitar building. So why do people claim that Chinese guitars are just plain junk? Well, some of it is cultural bias, and some of it comes from decades ago when imported guitars couldn't hold a candle to American-made guitars. But times have changed and China has vastly improved the quality of their instruments. Remember, they don't just build instruments for the US market. They sell guitars globally, and many within China itself. In fact, guitar playing has become increasingly popular in China over the past few decades. So it does these manufacturers no good to build poor products, especially when they sell mostly using Amazon. Amazon requires its vendors to handle the cost of any returned products. So making guitars that are junk wouldn't be a long-term business strategy. It's clear that China makes a variety of guitars from very cheap toys to high-end models, and their quality can range from poor to superior, just like any other product mass-produced in any other part of the world. Yes, it's true, China does have a history of child and forced labor. Human Rights Watch currently reports that child labor is used in the following industries in China: aluminum, caustic soda, jujubes, metallurgical grade silicone, polyvinyl chloride, and squid. A report released by the Institute for the Study of Labor in Bonn, Germany states, child labor is not a negligible social phenomenon in China. About 7.74% of children aged from 10 to 15 were working in 2010. And they worked for 6.75 hours per day on average and spent 6.42 hours less per day on study than other children. About 90% of child laborers were still in school and combined economic activity with schooling. Our results show that child labor participation is positively associated with school dropout rates. A child living in a rural area is more likely to work. So that report shows that children are in the Chinese labor force, despite China passing the People's Republic of China labor law. This law prohibited employment of children under the age of 16. While minors are protected by law, there are some exceptions. Those exceptions state that children can work in certain fields if their education is not hindered. But laws aren't always followed, and the government itself has been accused from time to time of breaking its own laws. Also, some people are so impoverished in China that everyone in a family, regardless of age, works to help support the household. So what does this mean for the guitar industry in China? Well, I have no proof that children aren't involved in guitar building in China, but it seems very unlikely. Guitar manufacturing in China is run very much like it does here in the US. If you watch YouTube videos of Chinese guitar factory tours, you will see what looks like average men and women working, doing a variety of tasks, just like guitar plants here in the US. And just for contrast, there are still child labor law violations that happen here in the US. The Department of Labor has reported an increase in child labor violations in recent years. Between October 1st, 2022 and July 20th, 2023, the Department of Labor concluded 765 child labor cases, found 4,474 children employed in violation of federal child labor laws, and assessed more than $6.6 million in penalties against employers. That said, it doesn't excuse China or any other country from exploiting children or using forced labor. That should not be tolerated in any form. So that leads me to the ethics of buying Chinese-made guitars. If we buy a guitar from China, is it ethical? Are we contributing to the decay of American guitar manufacturing? Are we contributing to exploited labor or child labor or the communist government? Well, those are gray areas. I can't speak to whether the Communist Party in China takes profit from private companies, but I have read that the Communist Party can exert power over any sector it wants to in China. After all, it is a communist nation, but not all companies are state-owned. The internet reports that in 2019, the average monthly income for guitar workers in China's Guizhou province was 3,500 yuan per person, which is about $480 US. This may not seem like a lot of money to many of us, but a recent article from China Global Television Network's website suggests that guitar manufacturing jobs are helping to lift Chinese people out of poverty. At the end of the day, the people in China are just trying to survive like any of us. They work hard to support themselves, and like it or not, when we purchase the goods they make, it provides them with jobs and income. If the US suddenly stopped buying Chinese goods, it would put millions of people out of work. But what about American workers, you ask? Well, that ship sailed a long time ago when companies began shifting manufacturing to other countries to be more profitable. If wages have kept pace with inflation in this country, there would have been no need for companies to move operations overseas because we'd be able to afford American-made products. Companies have also put profits over people, which means moving operations overseas makes them a lot more money. So the ethics argument doesn't really hold up. You can't claim to not want to buy Chinese-made guitars because it supports all things bad about China and then go buy a guitar from Fender or Gibson, because Fender and Gibson have also set up shop in China, Korea, and Indonesia. Or they contract with companies in those countries to manufacture their cheaper brands like Squier and Epiphone. So Gibson and Fender are indirectly supporting China as well. You could always buy from Heritage Guitars in Kalamazoo, Michigan, or other small U.S. guitar builders, but chances are some of the components in those guitars are also made overseas. We live in a global marketplace. You can't really escape products made in China. So what's the truth about Chinese-made guitars? Well, there really isn't one simple truth. Some of the cliches have some truth to them. Some of them are way over-exaggerated. Certainly China builds some great guitars. Buying guitars from China helps put money in the pockets of people just trying to make a living. It also gives us a cheaper alternative to USA-made guitars. That doesn't mean we shouldn't consider USA-made instruments, but the cost of those guitars can be far out of reach for many people. Also, if you're avoiding buying Chinese-made guitars because of ethical concerns, you'd actually face those same concerns buying from Gibson or Fender, since they also utilize labor from China. For me, I will still buy guitars made from a variety of countries and most likely stick with guitars that are under $500. Until there are some affordable alternatives made in the US, and by affordable, I mean at least in the $600 to $800 range, I'll continue to review budget guitars. And those guitars are most often made in China. So what do you think? Do you have any issues buying Chinese-made guitars? Do you think the quality of Chinese-made guitars is inferior to US-built? Let me know what you think in the comments, and please, again, keep it civil. Thanks for watching. I'm Jace Allen. We'll see you next time.